Welcome to This Week from the Principal's Desk, a podcast about Lutheran schools and their leadership. This podcast is hosted by two Lutheran school leaders. My name is Rob Lunak, and I'm the superintendent of Lutheran neighborhood schools in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
And my name is Mike Sheeman. I'm principal at Bethany Lutheran School in Parma, Ohio. Today, Rob and I are going to talk about a fun topic, something that I know kids really look forward to, most of the time teachers look forward to, and even some of our parents, but something that we can offer students in a unique way at Lutheran schools. We're going to talk about school trips. Now, we're not talking generally about like field trips, to the local farm or the orchard or whatever, something on a bigger scale to talk about what are ways or what are some of the ideas that we've seen about taking kids off-site, maybe some overnight trips, because I know this is a topic that sometimes there's some nervousness about because there are a lot of aspects to taking students off-site for overnight trips and how does this all work? So we just thought we would address the topic a little bit, share some of our experiences, and hopefully give some ideas and maybe even some encouragement for ways that you can use trips for learning experiences, not just about curriculum standards, but about life skills as well. So we just thought we would dive in a little bit and discuss that topic. So Rob, do you want to share a little bit about some of your experiences with trips like this with students?
Yeah, I think this is a really important topic because these are really valuable trips from an educational standpoint. They get your kids out of just their kind of local community. It's an out of the ordinary field trip, teaches a lot of responsibility. They get a lot of new experiences, and it's really a great thing to look back on because I'm sure you had trips when you were in school, and those are things that you remember. They stick out in your head. And that's what we are able to do for us. We get to build these experiences and build these memories for these kids. My take on them was, hey, let's go. Let's find a way to get out of our little community and see something that our kids sometimes don't have the ability to see. For a lot of Lutheran schools, that's like Washington, D.C. is a really popular one. Their state capital. I know a couple schools around here have been going out to like South Dakota, South or maybe North Dakota every year for like the last 40 years. They all partner up and they go, and it's kind of this big outdoor ed experience for them, which is really neat. So if you don't have anything like this at your school, this is definitely one of those things that I would say seriously consider. And there is a lot of work that goes into planning this, but that doesn't mean it's impossible to do. It's just like anything else. Once you learn how to do it, it gets a little easier. My first year in Kansas City, he'd gone to Branson every year, and I'm like, cool, Branson, can I take them to Washington, D.C. instead? And the principal at the time was like, hey, if you can find a way to pay for it, sure. You're not getting any money out of our budget. I'm not going to hold my breath, but hey, good luck. And we went to Washington, D.C. in March. That's like, we made it work, right? You did a lot of fundraising and did a lot of planning. So some of these things start with an idea and somebody who's passionate about it. And if you have a teacher who's coming to you and be like, hey, I really want to take the kids to X place, I'm going to encourage you that your first answer should not be no. It should be, tell me about that. Explain that. How would that work? What would we do with this? And Mike and I are going to talk a little bit about our experiences here. So hopefully there's something you can take from that if you don't have one of these already. Or if you do have one, hopefully there's some things we can help clarify or streamline for you.
Exactly. And I think both Rob and I have some varied perspectives on this because of the places where we've served. So if I go back a few years, I was principal at a school in Portland, Oregon. And when we talked about going to DC, the school had never done it before. And we had a teacher that was really passionate about it. And he came to me and he said, I want to take these kids to DC, but if we're going to literally fly across the country, let's make it something more. So it turned into a 10-day trip that the kids went to DC, they went to Philadelphia, saw the Liberty Bell and all that stuff. And then they went up to New York City and they had like a whole kind of East Coast excursion. But the cost of the trip at the time was $4,500 per kid. And that was a little bit of an eye opener because one of the things that I had said was if we do a trip like that, I want every single kid to have the opportunity to go. I don't want money to stand in the way, but I can't right now chip in from our budget for that. So how are we going to make that happen? And he had a real drive for this. He got some parents on board and they did a lot of fundraising. They did everything that they could and then realized that even after their efforts, there were still some families that were struggling financially. Now, the teacher knew that and I knew that, but the family was like, the families that were struggling didn't want it well known. Makes sense. But we were able to go to some people and say, "Hey, would you be willing to sponsor our trip to DC?" And we were able to get some money through alternative sources that we gave to those families. Now, you could say it's not fair that one family would pay for an entire trip and another family might get support. I don't care about money at the end of the day. I want these kids to have an experience because, like Rob said, it's opening their eyes up to the world. And sometimes kids get so stuck in their little corner of the world that they don't understand things are a whole lot bigger. And showing them a virtual tour of DC using, you know, Google Earth or a virtual field trip or something like that, it does not even come close to comparing to what a trip there is actually like. So we had that experience, and it's something that the school still does. And but here now I'm in Ohio, in Cleveland. It's super easy. It's 6 hour drive. So our trip looks different. We fund it differently. If from $4,500 now it's $1,000, and we get not all the same experiences, but a lot of them. But at the end of the day, it's something that meets the needs of our families. Now, we also use trips in a big way as a marketing tool because so many schools these days are saying, I don't want to take kids out. What if the bus gets in an accident? What if somebody gets sick? I mean, COVID was a thing. What if all these things? And we kind of said, I think we can mitigate these risks. And we found ways to make that happen. And right now at Bethany, we are working on trips for every single one of our classes from fifth through eighth grade. Now, we'll get a little bit to talk about parents in a hair, but for now, it's exciting to say to our parents who are interested in our school, yeah, we take the kids out and they go to different places, and here's what our trip schedule looks like. And it's been a lot of fun, and we're able to hit a lot of things. So that's been my experience both from both sides of the country. Rob, what about you?
Yeah, two things I want to talk on there. The liability and the cost are the main drivers for a lot of places to go, we're not going to do that. It's too risky, it's too expensive. And you can you can talk yourself into making anything too risky. Right? Places have gone on trips, other schools do it. You need to plan for it. And that means you need to have people sign waivers and you need to bring kids' insurance information. My second year in DC, we're in the Library of Congress and going up the steps, the lady's like, hey, these steps are going to be slippery. So we come back down, remember they're slippery. And we walk up, we walk back down. A kid looks at the view, doesn't pay attention to the steps, slips, rolls her ankle. Okay, minor thing, right? We go sit down on a bench. She passes out. And I'm like, okay, well, now we have a bigger issue, right? So we ended up taking a trip to the hospital, got her checked out. And as I get there, the lady at the hospital clearly had seen plenty of schools come through on tours. Do you have a paper copy for insurance information? I'm like, I have it on my phone. And she's like, sir, you need to print it out. Haven't you gone on a trip before? Thank you, ma'am. I print it out now. I know for sure now. You can learn from my mistake. You know that. You got to print it out now. But that is something that I still plan for. And now, we have a better way to do that. So liability, be careful. Don't do anything like I wouldn't take all your kids skydiving, but a trip across the country, you can mitigate that, like Mike said. Now, as for fundraising and cost, when we were in DC, we didn't get a tour company. We walked around and we got on the metro and we got metro cards for every kid. And I was on the front of the group and we had parents sprinkled through the middle and a parent at the back of the group. And it's like, okay, we're going to get on here, get off of this stop. We're all going to ride public transit. And there was a bus that went around, like you could take it was $1 to get to all these other places. So for us, it was cheaper than getting a tour bus, and we had to fly out there and fly back. That was cheaper for us too, surprisingly. We looked and it made sense. So don't always think it's out of reach. At least check and then be creative. And you know how we raised money for that trip? We raked leaves. We went to the congregation and we said, if you need somebody to rake your leaves or shovel your snow or clean your basement, think of the eighth graders. And then that's what we did every Saturday for the rest of the year from when school started till when we even got back on our trip. Because I told the kids, hey, we're going to fundraise all year. We're going to go on our trip in March. You're going to keep fundraising in April and May because we're helping out next year's class. And that was just a culture we built around it. So there are ways around some of these things. Don't let the liability or the cost just automatically prohibit you from thinking about being able to do some of these things. Okay. Other trips I've gone on that have been not, I won't say across the country trips, but ones that have some liability and some cost, amusement parks. If you have an amusement park by you, they probably have some curriculum day of some kind, whether it's a math day, a physics day. Some of them have like a music day. We had one by us that did a physics day. So we took the middle school and we went, and everyone's got to sign the waiver. You need to bring the chaperones. And with that, an amusement park is a fun thing. And kids sometimes go, oh, I can ride whatever I want. I'm like, well, hang on. You have to stay with your chaperone. Here's your itinerary. I need you to try all these rides because it is still a school trip. It's not just for fun. Like, you need to do this and fill out this and go to this ride and check this thing out. And that usually works pretty well. And if you have great chaperones, that works really well. Now, Mike, you'd mentioned we were going to talk about chaperones in a minute. Well, here's that minute.
Here it
Chaperones,
is.
good and bad. If you train them and you prepare them and they are going to follow your instruction, great. Because at the end of the day, it's a school trip. And you as a chaperone are here on the school trip. You're not on a personal trip with your kid. You're not doing whatever you want. You're on a school trip. We have probably all had the experience of a chaperone who has gone rogue. And they've gone, I'm just going to take my kid for a minute. And I'm like, no, you can't. You got to watch the 5 other kids too. You can't just go with your kid. And every once in a while, you'll have somebody do that. And you got to have that conversation. You got to prepare for that. And I'll always have that conversation now before we go anywhere. Hey, you're a chaperone. You are representing the school on this trip. It is a responsibility you have to care for the other kids and to follow our itinerary and to do the things we're going to do. Now, Mike, I know you've had an experience with this, so why don't we jump to you?
Yeah, I think we've had the parent that says, like you said, Rob, I'm going to take my kid and I'm going to go get him Slurpee, or I'm going to, we're in DC. I don't want him to see this monument. I'm going to go see the other monument. It's something that has really led me to start doing parent meetings well ahead of the trip. And if I take chaperones, that is an if, they are going to be made very clear with what my expectations are, and even go so far as to sign off on them, because I feel that we need something to hold them accountable. They have to understand that there is a responsibility. You are relying on them to watch other kids as well. So it's not just about them and their own kid, which is great. I'm glad they're going to get their selfies with their kids at the Washington Monument, whatever. But it is a much, much bigger thing because you are relying on them as a school to help you out. Now, I will encourage you to figure out how you're going to do this. I'm not going to say how you should, because I think this can happen in a lot of ways, but I know everybody listening here is going to say, you have parents you would not want to have come on the trip. So how do you say yes to some and no to the others? You don't want to say, no, you're the crazy parent that I don't trust, that I think would take your kid. You might have that in your head, but I pray that your filter is strong enough that it doesn't come out of your mouth. But where is the equity when you have that parent that wants to go and you're saying no to them, but you're saying yes to the other parent? Maybe it does warrant a crucial conversation with that parent to say, well, this is what I've seen in other places and it's been a struggle. I'll leave that up to you if that's something that you want to have. But the one way that we've tried to address it here is there are trips that we take our kids on where I don't allow chaperones to come. DC is now one of those trips. We just take staff and we make it very clear. This is a staff only trip. So when parents ask me, can we come? I say no. And it just blanketed across. Now, at first, some parents pushed back on that a little bit, but when they saw, no, it's just going to be us, and nobody was allowed to go, they understood that. I found though with DC, I'm just really being maybe DC specific here, the parents just really wanted to somehow have contact with their kids. And so we found a way to make that happen. Like, should kids have cell phones on trips? We actually made the decision. We allowed the cell phones on the trip. Parents could talk to their kids. They could text back and forth. However, there were rules about them on the tour. And then at night, when we were in the hotel, the chaperones collected all the cell phones. We brought cell phone charger banks and we charged them in the chaperone rooms and then gave them back to the kids the next morning. Lots of ways that you can work to figure that out. But I'd encourage you to understand what the concerns of the parents are that want to go on the trip. And if you understand those concerns, you can then address them. There are trips, though, where I rely on parent volunteers, maybe because I need drivers. Maybe it's because I need people to run aspects of an outdoor program, whatever it is. But again, I can't speak enough to saying lay out those expectations ahead of time. And if you're struggling with a parent, don't shy away from a conversation to pull them aside and say, hey, listen, we talked about this. I just saw that you pulled your kid aside. I really need you here watching this. at the end of the day, the burden of responsibility still is the schools. If a parent does something nutty and you're upset with them, well, that's still on you. So it is important that the teachers or the administrator has eyes on everything that's happening and really has to make sure that these parents can fulfill their responsibilities. This also floods into the conversation around background checks. Um, so many schools do background checks and they can proudly, beat their chest and say, I have a background check on every single parent. Great. What do you do with those? What in a background check would preclude a parent from being able to supervise on a field trip? What in a background check would keep a parent from being authorized to be a driver? So it's great that you do them, but I think you need to make sure you have parameters around that. So for us, like we look at the background check, and if there's a DUI on there from the last 15 years, you're not driving my kids, period. So extend your policy beyond we do them to, okay, what do you do with them? Does that make sense, Rob? I don't know how you handle those.
It does. And it's one of those things that for a lot of our schools, they run them and that's it. Nothing ever comes up. So you never need to worry about it. And that is not the case everywhere. You have parents in some of our schools that have law enforcement contact in their history. And those parents can be anywhere. They can be in any school, in any place. That's just part of life. And you need to have something prepared for that. Like Mike said, what would stop them from driving? What would stop them from volunteering at all? What are those things? What's the standard for, okay, it was 20 years ago, or, they were a teenager then and they're an adult now. And those, you're not going to find guidelines that are consistent across the board anywhere. You won't. And I've seen schools that say, if we said a parent with a flag on their background check couldn't volunteer, we would have most of our parents who couldn't volunteer at all, right? We have schools that are like that. And those are still places where good ministry is happening. And you don't want to tell a parent, hey, you can't come and be a part of your kid's education, right? They want to be a part of their kid's education. Otherwise, they wouldn't have run the background check. They wouldn't have asked. And so if you can find a way to safely include them into that community, do that. But don't be silly. If they got a DUI, yeah, you don't let them drive. That's just, right? If they have some crime against a minor, no, you don't let them volunteer in the room, right? And that's the kind of icky reality of it, is that we have families who have criminal histories. And how do we work around that? And you want to have that ready beforehand. And the other thing is, I'm going to encourage you to not be the only one making those decisions, to bring in other people on that, to have kind of a committee and say, hey, we had this come up. Let's talk about it. Let's vote on it. And that insulates anyone from playing favorites. That insulates anyone from saying, well, I really don't like this person, so I wouldn't include them. And that really, really helps with that, distributing that policy. I've unfortunately been in churches where we had something like that come up, and it was, what do we do? And one person made that decision, and 2 months later, the whole congregation made that decision instead. And so you want to make sure that you've distributed that and you have procedures in place before you need them. Now
And
let's
local
talk.
law enforcement can help you with that too.
Yes, absolutely. Definitely lean on them. If you don't know who is assigned to your school, there's somebody assigned to your school. Call your local PD and ask them, and just invite them out to see your building once a year anyway. It's always good to know that person. They will give you their cell phone number. They're very nice. Now let's talk about student problems on the trip. One of the things, especially if we're going somewhere across the country, that I will always tell parents is, if something comes up and your kid needs to be sent home, they will be sent home on a plane. I will go with them, and it will be your responsibility to pay for both our tickets out there and my ticket back to the trip. And so let your kid know, hey, you want to be a fool, now's not the time. You want to do something silly, wait till you get home. And I've never had to use that, thank the Lord. But you need to know, if some kid does something dumb that means they're going to get sent home, what do you do? Are you just going to be like, okay, well, you're on a field trip, I guess you can do whatever you want, wait till we get back? Or do you have a policy to get them back? Maybe the parents got to come get them. Maybe you fly them home, whatever it is. Because while we'd like to think that nothing ever goes wrong on school trips, things sometimes go wrong on school trips. We talked about how you got to plan for that and don't let that scare you. But the reality is that things happen. Mike, is there anything that's happened on a school trip you'd be willing to share that kind of falls into that category?
Well, I'm in the same boat you are. Thankfully, I've never had to use that either. And I'm very grateful. I do make that comment as well. Yeah, if anything happens, they're sent home on your dime. Um, Typically, I might pull some kids aside ahead of time that I suspect might be offenders and just be like, listen, we want everybody to have a good time on this trip. I don't want to have to tie a leash to you, but I will, like that, figuratively, of course. Uh, but I've never had to pull the trigger, but I do think it's something that you need to consider. Um, I have done it before where I've made the threat that if a kid's behavior is going downhill, I've threatened to take the trip away. And usually, you know what? Honestly, I think every kid that I've ever seen, even the ones that are difficult kids, they want to go on these trips. They do look forward to them. And I would. I mean, if a kid did something and if I had to threaten to pull the trip away and it happened again, I would do it. I mean, and the kids here know, I mean, I'm gonna follow through on what I say. But I'm just really thankful that I've never had to pull that trigger. I'm sure that there are people listening that are going, "Oh, I've got a story, I've got a story," and I would love to hear them. I mean, what did you do, or what was the story? It's always interesting to hear and learn from others. But yeah, in general, I mean, I always tell the kids, you're representing three things: God, Bethany, and yourself. And this is, you know how you should be representing those things, and I'm going to be looking for those things on the trip. And they've always done really well. I'm blessed with some good students I've worked with in the past. But why don't we talk about one more thing here too, Rob? You alluded to this earlier in the podcast about using companies and how it can be cheaper just to kind of go on your own. Should you use a company? I'm going to tell you this. There are companies out there that are going to beg you for their business. They want your business. And even if it's your first trip, I would encourage you to have a look at that. There's a lot of companies. If any of you go to any of the LEA conferences or convocation, whatever, they're going to be in the exhibit hall. I guarantee you. If you come to LEA admin conferences, you will find these companies. I don't want to name them because there's just so many, but and different people think differently about different companies. But I'm going to tell you, we've always used a company, and typically, if you say to them, "Hey, listen, money's an issue for us, and I don't know that we can afford you," they can also adjust your trip to make it so that you can afford them. You have to decide if those adjustments are within what you're willing to do. But I've always been appreciative of the tour guides that we've had. They tend to give you a lot more information than if I was doing a trip. Now, okay, I'm a Canadian going on a trip to DC, but I mean, if Rob was leading the trip to DC with his American history knowledge, I'm sure he gives lots of great information. These tour guides give a ton, and it's been fantastic. Now, last trip we went to DC, we loved our tour guide, and he was even flexible in the schedule to say, it says this monument's going to take us an hour. You guys are going to look at it in 15 minutes and be done. Can I add on these and show you a few extra things? Or the kids are really looking tired. If we go back to the hotel a little bit early, we can do this monument tomorrow because we're going to be in that area. They know their stuff. And it was really cool. Our last tour guide really endeared themselves to our kids. And it was super cool to see the fun relationship they built. They loved this guy. And it even got to the point I reached out to him and said, "Hey, this class is going to graduate in June. You want to do like a video message for him?" And he did, and the kids just adore him. They still talk about him. We've requested him again for our next trip. And so some of these companies do a really good job, but ask some questions because some of these companies do a really bad job. And you can always go to Facebook to the Lutheran pages and all that kind of stuff and put it out there. Hey, who have you used? Who have you had success with? That thread has come up over and over again, and make it happen more if you have those questions. But I'd encourage you to reach out to some people. If you want some good recommendations, feel free to reach out to me. Rob, I don't know if you've used companies or if you have ones that you would recommend, but check around because there are some really good ones with some great value as well.
I'm not a tour guide. I have not used a company before. We've planned them all in-house. Two things that I'll encourage people to do if you're going to DC specifically. The Smithsonian campus, it was our first stop every time we went to DC because the buildings are free to get into. And, we didn't know if our flight was going to be delayed or whatever, traffic or whatever. So that was our first stop, our first day. We said, hey, and we split up into little groups. And I said, you are allowed to explore this campus, walk building to building. You can go to Air and Space. You can go to Natural History. You can go to all of them, whatever you want to do, the Art Museum, whatever you want to do. Explore for the day. And it was a really neat thing. And it opened up our schedule, and you gave the kids a little bit of freedom in that campus. So then you knew right away and you could adjust for the next day. Okay, I know this kid needs a little bit of a tighter leash. I know I can trust this group. And that was a really good introduction. The second thing is Arlington National Cemetery. You can request to lay a wreath at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. You got to do that ahead of time. But we've had kids that were privileged enough. We bought the wreath and had it delivered to the cemetery. Well, no, we didn't even have it delivered to the cemetery. It got delivered to the hotel. I took the metro back to the hotel and then got on the metro in rush hour traffic with this giant wreath and then walked to the cemetery. So you can have it delivered to the cemetery. Do that instead for sure. And then the kids were privileged enough to be able to place that on the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier during the changing of the guard. Really, really neat thing. Doesn't cost you anything except the wreath. So those are my two. If you're going to DC, please go to the museums and definitely try the wreath experience. It's something those kids will never forget.
I'm going to piggyback. If you go to DC, the other thing that I can't say enough about is the Museum of the Bible. It's phenomenal. It's a 6-story museum, and all of the biblical artifacts that they have there. One of the floors has a living walkthrough of both the Old and New Testament that I've never forgot. It was absolutely incredible. It really brought the Bible alive to the kids that went through this whole thing. So yeah, if we're talking DC specific, I can't say enough great things about the Museum of the Bible. But I know that there are other trips that are out there as well. Maybe you just do like Rob said, you go to an amusement park where you cross state lines and hit a museum somewhere else that's farther away. I think the bottom line here is how can we open up the eyes of our kids to the world around us and do it from the Christian worldview that Lutheran schools provide. And I would encourage that because so often the secular world has these kids going all over the place, but you are the one that is going to faith integrate these places for the kids. So make it something unique, make it something that is a big deal for your school, which is another reason, not the reason, but another reason why families would say, I want to choose this Lutheran school for the education of my child. It's something that is memorable, and it's going to be a lifelong memory for the kids that participate. So I strongly encourage it.
Last thing, and then I think we can probably wrap up here. The Lutheran system is so vast that if there's something you want to go to, you should look and see if there's a school or a church nearby, and then contact them. Be like, hey, we want to go to this. Do you guys think you'd have somebody who'd be willing to show us around, or be willing to house us, or maybe you do like a student exchange program for a day? Like, hey, we're going to be in the area. Can our kids go to school with your kids for the day? Just there's a lot of opportunity there to tie into this network that we have that personally I don't think we lean on strongly enough. That was my very first Google search when I was thinking about DC. I'm like, okay, what Lutheran churches are in DC? Can we sleep in your gym? Right? Like that was my very first thought. So definitely lean on that. You don't have to do any of this alone. You don't have to plan any of this from scratch. If you have an idea, there's somebody out there, whether that's on the Lutheran Facebook page or the LEA listserv, or heck, email us, and we're more than happy to try and hook you up with somebody who's done it.
Yep. In fact, if it's okay, Rob, I'm going to do 2 shout outs here really quick. We did do a trip last year to Columbus, Ohio. It's our state capital. We went and did all of that stuff. And I mean, St. John Lutheran in Marysville, Ohio. We stayed in their school. They were our hosts. It was tremendous and a great way that we connected with St. John Marysville. Love that school. And the other thing is just if you're going to DC, I would encourage you to look up Greg Seltz. He's the director of the Lutheran Center for Religious Liberty. He's based in DC, and he does a lot of great advocacy work for Lutheran churches, Lutheran schools in DC. And I know, having talked to him, that he would be more than happy to welcome groups, to talk to your school groups about the work that he does, which is really important work for religious freedoms in the Capitol building in that area. So I would encourage you to reach out to him. But yeah, I think wrapping this up, we can just kind of close it off in prayer and enjoy the topic. All right, let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this world that you've created. God, it is a beautiful place with so many wonders to see, and in each wonder we see your fingerprints as the author of creation. I thank you for the opportunity for our students and our schools to go and visit these places and to see the things that you have done. And I pray that as they do, that they would once again marvel at the work of your hands and know that as you've created this world to be such a beautiful place, you've created each of them to be special, beautiful, unique people that you dearly love. And I pray that that would be the message that would be sent even in Washington, D.C. and Columbus, Ohio, and at the roller coaster park. God, as we look to all these trips, I'm sure that are coming up, pray that you be with the teachers, the administrators that plan them, keep all of the students safe that travel, and bless their learning as they learn more about who you are. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
We hope you have enjoyed this episode of From the Principal's Desk. If you found it helpful, please share it with someone else that can help. If you found it entertaining, please leave a rating or a review. And if you want to hear more episodes like this, subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Have a good week.